What is up guys, it's Zero here, and today I have for you the monthly tier list for Vanguard 0 GP, yay. So I think starting with this tier list, I think I will revamp it a little bit and just condense it even more to honestly just just strictly tournament viable decks plus everything from the newest current decks. In this case it would be set 19, so all of those decks are on there regardless of how good they are. To me personally, if a deck is not at least tier 2, I wouldn't even bother considering it for a tournament environment, and that's what I'm basing my tier list on. So that is basically what the tier 3 is there for. The tier 3 is for the new decks that I don't think are good enough, but I will rank on here just because they are new, and I'm sure people are curious where they would rank here, and it will be really weird for a deck from this month that came out this month to not be on the list. So yeah, so as you can see, I've cut down the number of decks here quite a bit, so there's less decks overall to talk about, but this also gives me more time to go more in depth into certain decks. So yeah, so without further ado, let's start. I guess I'll explain the tiers too. Tier 3 is literally honestly like the new decks that I don't think are good enough to be played in a tournament, because if a deck is not on here, that means they are tier 3 or worse. So if you're I guess normal stuff would be like, I don't know, like Link Joker. None of those decks are on here. I don't think those decks are good enough right now. What else is like mildly playable? That's D Police, I guess, is, or like the deck Kaiser that you show, like what do you want to call, like the non metalborg stuff. Those would be in the tier 3. So if you don't see a certain deck in here, it is tier 3 or worse. So yeah. So the tier 3 is for like the decks that I don't think are good enough. Tier 2 is like you're playable and you're good enough in a tourney. You have things that let you be unfair and let you win the game, but you are slightly worse than whatever's in tier 1. And tier 1 are the best decks in the format right now. So yeah. So without further ado, let's start. So I'll just go. I'll start with the older decks first. So I guess Sook is the first thing on here. It's tier 2, I think. I think Sook is still a very strong deck for tournament. Lots of the JP players still play it. I would still consider it as one of the better decks in the game right now. Obviously, still the same problem as usual. The deck hasn't gotten updated since set 10, so it's still the same decks from back then. The deck, when it gets to go off, it is legal cheating. When it bricks on the right chain or you soul charge all the wrong things, you just kind of fall over and die. But that's part of any card game. Bricking is always there, but this deck's win con is still rather strong. I still think it is a very powerful deck that deserves to be on any competitive tourney setting tier list, because people definitely do play this deck in a competitive setting, just not on ladder, because that is not worth your time. It is not worth a headache every game to play this deck on ladder, unless you really enjoy it. So yeah. I actually want to talk about silver thoughts later. I'll go over all the newer decks later as well. So risers. So I think this deck is actually really underrated. I don't think this deck is terrible or anything. I think this deck is definitely very playable. The game plan of using the fact that most decks play new PGs nowadays, you push the 5 and with the Mega Flare, and then you triple check with the Phoenix one, the thing that restays your front row. Of course, that's still a pretty powerful win con. You have a bunch of plussing cards like Transriser, Street Bouncer, Energy Charger that you just plus, so you can't draw anything. This deck's biggest problem is having enough intercepts to last out the entire game. As if you noticed, a lot of the good decks in the meta right now are constantly pumping out double intercept turn after turn after turn. This deck can struggle to do that. And another problem is if you play a bunch of the plussing grade 2s, a lot of them are relatively small power line. Transriser 7k, Bouncer's 8k. If you play Kirara, she's 9k, but she costs Counterblast, so not my favorite card to play, but Kirara's fine, I guess. I don't think I'm forgetting any of the other plussing grade 2s, but yeah, Transriser and Bouncer both are understated because of the fact that they plus, assuming wise, but that's like a mild issue, not the biggest issue, because most of the time the rears are going to rears anyway. As long as you have a booster, those things can hit, but if you don't have a booster, those skins can be a detriment to your deck, so yeah. Overall, strong. I think deck's still pretty strong. Has a cohesive game plan, but the deck's biggest fault is that you can't just vomit intercepts out every single turn. So yeah. I'd say it's definitely under Sook and split still in tier 2. Brawlers. I think Brawlers are. I think they're probably better than Risers. Brawlers are probably better. I don't know if they're better than Sook though. I'll put it here. I do hold Sook in quite the high regard. So Brawlers, they aggro, they push you. all the lanes scale. They're scary when they get to push you and you hit like no heals and stuff. But we are in Legion format where everyone gets to heal. So this deck needs the game to end by turn like 4, maybe turn 5, because this deck is not the best at drawing their PGs, drawing their intercepts and stuff like that, unless you're like super second draws. But this deck is a deck that wants to play a super fast paced game where you just want to get it end as fast as possible. Deck still has the same Narukami problems that every other Narukami deck has. They don't plus very well, except for, I think the only card that still plus is the Rising Phoenix. They can't draw their intercepts, but they excel just pushing damage and ending games really fast. 2 counter blasts, you always have to be scared because Big Bang Knuckle just bash your front row. If they have scaling rears, they'll just scale rears on you too. So when you're at 4, you need 2 PG, and you're at 3, it's 3 or lose the game. So deck is scary, but I don't think it is anywhere near tier 1 because I think that the problem is I'm not going to draw intercepts, not plussing well enough, as well as not draw PGs as well. Of course, are glaring enough problems that I would not consider this anywhere better than tier 2. Yeah. So, next deck. That is Novell. So I think Novell is definitely near the lower end of this now. How the Mighty Have Fallen. They were tier 1 like 2 months ago, but Legion, if your deck doesn't have Legion yet and you're not named Sook, your deck will start to struggle right now. Or I guess there are other decks too, like Silver Thorns, but we'll get to those later. We'll get to that later. This deck can play the Grand game because you can draw a bunch of PG and stuff, but not having Legion as a mechanic right now really hurts because decks are just hitting their triggers and putting them back and hitting those same triggers again, so the games end up being dragged on for longer than something like Aggro can deal with, because I think the meta just is in a state where if you sack, you get to sack again because of Legion. So it's still a strong deck. I think it's still a pretty like okay playable deck, but in the current format where all the good decks are Legion decks, you will, if you don't end the game within that like 5, like that turn 5, maybe turn 6-ish threshold, if it goes any further than that, which Legion games do go to like turn 7, turn 8 right now, like for quite frequently, you will run out of steam before the other player does. So yeah, and then Novell is still a very strong card. Being able to just shut off defensiveness is still pretty strong. So I think that does keep the deck in a relatively competitive area, but I definitely do think it is starting to fall off a bit. But next month we'll probably have Kagura Legion, so you can expect this deck to come right back up next month. At least with my predictions. At least I predict that it probably will shoot back up to top tier 2, maybe even tier 1, who knows. So that is for next month. Next up, we have Regalia. Yeah, the Regalia. I think this deck is actually also really good. Yggdrasil. I'll go to go put Yggdrasil is a glory, and that's pretty good because glory is good. You got crit, you have to knock crit the other hand as well, so you always make the whole deck trigger 3. Chamomile is what lets you, Chamomile plus Cider is what lets you loop intercepts every single turn. Both the Legions having the Soul Blast 3 draw also lets you just plus, and Hesperitus being able to snipe back row like every single turn, forcing to commit cards. Maybe forcing to commit grade 3 so they can't guard the Yggdrasil is really nice. The deck just has a very like good, when the deck gets to like see like a trigger or two early on, the deck just has a really good like cohesive flow to the deck where you get enough cards to draw to Legion, the Soul Blast 3 to draw lets you keep up card advantage. Hesperitus will force them to commit more cards on the board, and Yggdrasil is still a strong finisher. And if you have Yggdrasil's plus Chamomile and Soul, and they're at 4 damage, you are forcing a double PG grade 3, which is a pretty good, relatively good kill turn in my opinion. Glory check, and you reset your front row to guarantee double intercept, and you get extra swings with them, which is pretty solid. So yeah, I think this deck does have very powerful. Has one of the better kill turns right now. I think the biggest issue with the deck is that it can sometimes soul charge to all the wrong stuff, obviously, because some cards are still blind soul charges. And the fact that Yggdrasil cannot glory check the opponent unless they're at 4 damage, or you don't want to shoot them when they're at 3, unless you know they're playing old PG. You can just go shoot ahead when you're at 3. But if your opponent if you push them to 4 and they heal down to 3, you kind of have to play another sandbag before you can Yggdrasil, which is probably the deck's biggest issue. But if it's a situation like that, you might just want to ride next and push the 5 next turn and then reride Yggdrasil after that. So you can definitely adapt to the situation, but definitely can be really annoying when you push them to 5 or push them to 4 and then they heal down, you can't Yggdrasil check them anymore. So yeah, that is probably the next biggest problem because you don't have a way to cheat that 1 damage like Aquaforce does with the Demon using the battle. So yeah. But otherwise, I think this deck is still very powerful. Honestly, if you just look at data, this deck isn't represented as much. So I guess I'll do it like this. I guess if you look at data as well, this deck, Sook is still better than Eager Seal as a deck, but I think this deck is definitely better than these two decks in terms of Legion decks. So yeah. Next up we have Ezzell. Ezzell. I think Ezzell's like the very bottom of here. So again, this deck does not have, or you don't want to play any of the Legion cards, because both the Legion cards for Gold Paladin are bluish flames, and both those cards check for Liberator names, so you can't even use this in Ezzell. But I think Ezzell still has a spot in the meta just because big scary Lion Man has big shiny yellow stars, and sometimes if you just don't draw enough PGs, the game will end on turn 3 because you did not draw your PGs. And you can't even damage them because this deck is playing like minimum 8 pings in their decks to get their Limit Break online. So I think this deck is still relatively scary, but again, this deck has major draw PG issues, and you don't have Legion, so the games get dragged out for too long, you will fall over. But this deck does also can also put double intercept up super frequently once you get to Limit Breaking. So yeah, I think this deck still has a spot in the meta, but it is like a very, I think Ezzell is quite gimmicky just because right now you're basically hoping that they don't have a PG by like, don't have like 2 PGs by like turn 3, or have a PG by like turn 3 and don't have another one by turn 4 and they just die from that, or they just die outright. But yeah, I think it's okay, I think it's playable, but I don't think it is amazing. I definitely do think it is at the very tail end of these decks in tier 2 right now. Any other old decks here? I'll talk about Silver Thorns later. I do have quite a bit to say about that. These are new decks, I guess it's Seekers. This deck is still tier 1. This deck is still obnoxious. I hate playing against this deck. I don't like playing the deck myself either. But that's just me, I just don't like playing this deck. This deck is... It's super turtly. The deck just puts double intercept up every turn. They slowly chip away at you. They use Gringo to unflip. They slowly chip you away with the 2 Blaster Blades. Things Saver can push an extra damage as well. Wingo pushes out a bunch of intercepts. If you play Brutus, he can also produce an intercept. Yeah, and then you have the everyone's favorite heal trigger, Gancelot, the man on the horse. Yeah, Gancelot's honestly the entire deck. This deck just puts double intercept up and goes Ghetto, heal trigger, and then they Legion the heals back, and then they put those heals again. So yeah, this deck is, the best way to put it is, this deck is very good at abusing Legion, and that's all. That's like the only reason why this deck is as good as it is. Gancelot plus Legion equals really, really stupid, and I don't see this deck going away for a while because this deck at its core is abusing game mechanics more than actually being a good deck. So yeah, until Gancelot dies, this deck is not going to die for a while as long as we're in Legion. That's it for all the old decks, except for Silver Thorns. And also do this one first with all the new decks. I will put Silver Thorns at the very top of tier 2. So this is the first month where we got this deck with the nerfs. Nerfs with big quotes on them because the nerfs basically had done nothing to the deck. Did it slow it down? Yes. Actually, no, not really. It didn't slow it down. It just makes some plays unavailable, which is like an actual who cares. This deck is still your early game aggro did not get touched at all whatsoever. Your kill turns are basically still the same from 4. In my opinion, the only turns where this deck is a little bit worse than what it used to be is when your opponent's at 3 and you need to just you just want to push to 6, where you don't have like super high early plays where you can actually get like double check from 3 or like maybe even triple check from 3 if you're super lucky with triggers. But there's like lots of those because you can't loop Mari Chicas anymore. So yeah, this deck fundamentally is still doing the same thing. But again, I think the reason why I moved this deck down right now is just because this deck cannot abuse Legion because it's a lol cracking shit tamer. That card's fucking terrible. Oh yeah, I don't have that on here, but that's because that deck is absolute shit. I don't even know how to fucking build it. Don't bother with it. Just play Silver Thorns. But yeah, obviously since I said that, if I had it on here, it would be in tier 3. It'd be the very end of tier 3, and because that deck is absolute garbage. So yeah, this deck, it got nerfed, but it's fundamentally still the same thing. The only thing that really realistically changed is you can't push as hard when your opponent's at 3 damage, and I guess it also forces you to actually use Ana instead of just relying on using nothing but Morichico. So it actually forces you to play forces you to play more Anas, or it forces you to hold one in hand or have one on the board and hope it doesn't die, which it absolutely will now. So yeah, deck is still very strong. This deck is still very powerful. This deck wasn't very common on JP Ladder to begin with, so you never saw that much to begin with. But this deck was definitely everywhere in the tourney environment, and that's what this hero is based off of. So it absolutely belongs here. I think it's the very top of tier 2 right now. So yeah. So that's it for all the old decks. Onwards to the new decks. So I'm just gonna dump all the tier 3 stuff. So I think this deck is tier 3. I think this deck is tier 3. I think this deck is tier 3. So that also shows Omega. That fucking sucks. All you do is draw cards. Heck, why is Jelly 3 counterblast? She's CV3, draw 3, ditch 1. That's still only a +2. Like, damn, that is expensive. Like, with CV3, I could have used Overlord and cleared their front row for game. Yeah, like, yeah, you have a Legion now, but at the end of the day, the deck is still, it's still OTT, and your game plan is still get them to 5 and tom them, but this deck doesn't have a way to actually push for damage other than playing aggro triggers, but this deck runs into problems of if you play 9 draw, you have no way to push. If you play 9 curve, 9 stand, control decks will actually roll you over, so you don't have enough cards to fulfill board requirements for stuff like Fromage and for Jelly. But if you play split triggers, you run into inconsistency issues of flipping triggers at the wrong time, which is really bad, and I will never play split triggers, so this deck is in that like really awkward spot where it's like, or it's like, it just, if you high roll aggro triggers, pretty cool. If you high roll split triggers, that's also pretty cool. If you play 9 draw, you're very stable, you draw a bunch of cards, but you have no way to push damage, and you're just hoping you heal when you do that, so yeah. So I think it's here, it just isn't good, like, nothing about that said. Nothing much else to say, it's just not very good. Next up we have DI with the Astaroth, the Amon Legion. So initially I thought this deck would be good because you have a big scary yellow star Vanguard while recycling chariots and stuff, putting bajillion hoods back in your deck, but I forgot one very important thing. Unlike Seekers, this deck does not bomb and intercepts out every turn for free, so this deck is like, the biggest problem with this deck is that it doesn't generate card advantage. You have to flip draws. You have to flip draws to get cards into your hand, but at the same time you're flipping draws, you will run the rest of the deck up considering you're soul charging so much, because you need to hit at least 10 for Astaroth to gain 1 crit. A lot of times you do want the 20 for the 2 crits to pretend to be ragey. Sometimes damage dying is quite the viable strat sometimes. Even if decks aren't relying on Limerick anymore, they're still relying on Counterblast, so you can't deny them like that. But at the end of the day, like they don't need Counterblast to push damage if you don't have double intercept every turn. So yeah, the biggest problem with this deck, it doesn't generate enough advantage. It can be annoying when they flip a bunch of heals and they hit their draw, they get cards in hand, and then they crit check you every turn. But this deck is a little too high early for my liking. So yeah. This is the definition of a deck that looked good on paper, but isn't very good when you actually try to play the deck. So yeah. And finally, we're the deck for probably the best deck in here. I think it does have an argument to be in the tier 2-ish range, but I just don't see it with this deck. Is metalborgs. So they got Dryon's pretty cool. On a hit, you retire something. He has a crit. He's crit 2, so you can push to 5. Urbuster lets you retire more stuff, and then the grade 1 lets you draw cards. So this deck has all the makings of an okay deck, but the biggest problem with this deck is this deck cannot push damage, or not, this deck cannot deal with intercepts at all whatsoever. Like, you push them to 5? Alright, cool, they healed? Okay, you can't end the game with Sin Buster anymore, because Sin Buster does not have a crit. So, yeah, Sin Buster is a glory skill, but glory skills without crits in this game are honestly really bad. It requires your opponent to actually stay at 5 or not have double intercept. And at the moment, every good deck can maintain double intercept and heal, so this deck just can't this deck can basically never keep the opponent at the kill range, because if they heal, Cinemaster doesn't do anything, right? So if you ride into it, you're not doing anything. But if you stay on Dryon, they'll never be at 5 because you're crit checking them, they're PGing when they're at 4. So yeah, like this deck the biggest problem with this deck and every Deep Police deck is that it can't push past double intercepts. So yeah. Doesn't help that Simbuster doesn't have crit either. If you do decide to play the Daikaiser build with like the Daikaiser trying to cheese with Simbuster, like I said, it is cheese, so it's not. I don't think that's very good. I do think the pure build is better. But you could play cheese, or you could play pure build and cry when your opponent heals from 5 to 4 after you push them there. So yeah. If this deck could deal with intercepts, I think this deck would actually be pretty good. I think it'd be about as good as Genesis if this deck could actually push past the intercepts. Because Genesis does have ways to push past the intercepts. They can use the chamomile to push past the intercepts, and like I said earlier, chamomile does provide them double intercepts, can provide them extra intercepts. This deck also struggles to put up intercepts sometimes because all your advantage is from like blind draws that isn't like specified, like superior call, grade 2s and stuff like that. So yeah. Also struggles to put up double intercepts and can't deal with intercepts at all by themselves. So yeah, no, it's cool. It looks good. It looks kind of cool on paper. I thought it'd be a little better than this, but I haven't tried it myself. But I've looked at the deck. I've played against the deck. That never impresses me because I don't think that's very good. So yeah, definitely not amazing. I definitely do not think it belongs anywhere up here. So, I thought this deck was very good initially, but after playing it a bit myself, a little more, I think this deck falls at the very tail end of tier 2. I think this deck is actually better than these decks, and it's something you could consider as like a rogue pick, but the problem with this is that if you're playing Shadows, you're playing tournaments, you're usually clan locked on JP tournaments, and if you're playing Witches, that also means you can't play Revengers, which I think is a much better deck right now. And one of the best decks right now, but I'll go over it when I actually get to Revengers, so. Witches have they have a cool gimmick where they take triggers out of your opponent's deck, which I think is actually really good. So, yeah, but the problem is their costs are like super bloated for no reason. Like, Fiona CB3, all the ones that replace one card are CB2. There's some other shit that's like CB1, and I'm just like, damn, that's a lot of Power Blast, man. So this deck is like very aligned on seeing the first Lances to Unflip to actually do multiple plays. So yeah, high costs plus kind of gimmicky retire is like, it's not bad. I definitely think the gimmick of taking triggers out is pretty good because you can rip triggers out and then they don't have the triggers in their deck anymore. And they could die as either less chance to check defensive or just take the heals out straight up. So yeah, it's a little too gimmicky in my opinion. So for me to want to put this up any higher after playing it a bit. The other thing is a playable deck. So yeah. Although the best thing about this deck is that this deck is another counter pick to Sook if you're scared of running that tournament, because if you're clan locked and you know you're gonna end up playing against Sook, you play Witches and you can shuffle their deck for them because all the stuff that calls out the top shuffles his deck so you mess with their stack. So that's just a cool little gimmick that the deck has that it can do. Similar to how people did that back in the day when they played Aggro against Sook, where they sided into Steel Dragons. So yeah, that is one thing that's going for them. It has a really good Sook matchup, and if a tournament is clan locked, you play Witches against OTT and you play Revengers against everything else. So this deck does have a use like that. So I definitely do think this deck does not belong in the trash like these two decks do. So finally we have the last two decks. Revengers, I did do a deck profile for this, I don't know why I want to upload this, so I did do a deck profile for Revengers before, earlier, probably sometime this week, earlier, a few days ago, who knows. And the title was, back in tier 1, this deck is definitely in tier 1. Where, is it better than Seekers? I think it is about equal. I think these decks are about equal in power level. Seekers, I like to put it, Seekers die less, this deck kills you more. They're both really good at doing one thing. They're really good at abusing Legions because, if you've noticed, both these decks have a restanding Vanguard, and then when you Legion triggers back, you check those triggers more often, and then when they restand, they also draw you extra cards. So, in an ideal world, you're checking your heals and drawing your PGs, which actually does happen quite often because Legion is a very, very good mechanic. So, yeah, this deck is better at pushing damage than Seekers, but they don't have as much survivability as Seekers. So it's like kind of look at it that way. Like I said, this deck dies less, this deck kills you harder. But that doesn't take anything away from Revengers themselves. This deck is still very powerful. 4 drive checks after Legion triggers back, restanding Vanguard. You have BDRs to retire stuff. You can recycle the BDRs as well, but you still have to draw into them after that because when you Mordred Break Ride, you call something that's already in your deck, and then you Legion cards back after, so you can't Legion first and then call with Mordred. So you're not technically actually recycling them until you put them back yourself. So yeah, this deck is very powerful. I definitely do think these two right now are joint best deck right now. If you're playing in a tournament in a 2-deck format, I think these are definitely the 2 best decks to bring right now, Seekers and Revengers. So yeah, very, very powerful. And finally, Bluish Flames. So, where do I put this deck? I think this deck also belongs in tier 1. I think it is strictly worse than Seekers or Revengers, but I do think it still belongs in tier 1. I think it is a tier 1 deck, but I think it is the third best deck, and it is, I wish I could leave a gap here. I think it would be like here. There is a gap between these two decks, but I think it is still like a little bit better. I think aside from Silver Thorns, I think it is better than all these other decks because this deck has Legion, this deck has Man on Horse's heal, but not as good as the Royal Paladin Man on Horse, but still a Man on Horse. If you don't know what that is, Gansel Zenith, he still puts himself back. He's still technically a recyclable heal, and most importantly, you have Garmor. Garmor tells these two decks to not play the game sometimes because these two decks, the way they deal with intercepts is they retire. If they're not going for their restanding Vanguard, they can't push extra damage past Garmor because Garmor just says no to Blaster Blade Seeker and regular Blast Blade, and it says no to Blaster Dark. So yeah, I think this is like a kind of like an anti-meta niche pick right now, but it just happens to also just be a really good deck regardless of that. So yeah, Garmor, and I definitely think is the carry of the deck still because Garmor just says no to a lot of the current decks, to a lot of the matchups to the two most popular decks right now, the two best decks right now. So I think that alone puts it here, and then this deck is still also really good at plussing. Aggro is a plus, Percival is a plus, Garmor is a really random plus, but you still a plus. You still have infinite blast with clear intercepts and stuff. And it's just an overall solid deck, but the reason why it is worse than the other two is that it's just not as good at abusing Legion because you don't have, and it doesn't have as much hand fixing because you're not playing like a bunch of filters, a bunch of draw skills. You can play Josephus, but that's also a blow at range to call him off the top, so there's that. And yeah, it just doesn't have like the oomph that the other two decks have in their restanding Vanguard. Because those decks just get 4 drive checks in a turn, or can get 4 drive checks in a turn. This deck can never get 4 drive checks. And more drive checks means more change at the sack after putting triggers back, so yeah. Garmor good, but no way to abuse. Not as good at these two decks at abusing Legion, so not as good as these two decks, so. So yeah, tier 1, these two are joint best decks. This is the third deck. I think Silver Thorns actually do have an argument to be up here in tier 1, but I think it just isn't as good as these decks right now. If you put this up here, it's like cool, whatever. You can say I think it's still a really strong deck, but it definitely is a little slower than these two decks, or I guess slower is the term to put it, because this deck is very fast. It just, I don't know, it just isn't as good. Let's just leave it at that. And then these decks are all really good, more or less. I think these decks are all about the same power level. If you ask a JP player, they probably would put Sook up here as well because they love the deck and they're very scared of the deck. I do think the Sook could be put up here as well, but I just can't. I just don't think it belongs up here with these decks. So yeah. This is the monthly tier list. Tell me guys how you like the new format with the less decks. Just look at the recoil time right now. It is longer than the other tier list I've done in the past like 2 months or so. Even though there are less decks, but I did get to talk more about these decks, so yeah. Tell me guys what you think about like the newer format where it's strictly competitive and stuff. Also, I guess I'll tell you guys if you want one for ladder, but the spoilers alert, the ladder tier list is basically the same thing minus Sook, honestly speaking. So yeah, like and subscribe, all the good stuff, and I will see you guys next time. Peace out.